Hello, my loves. Welcome back to the channel for another video. Today, we're talking about the tarot decks that I use the most in 2024 as a professional tarot reader. Now, I also have an oracle version of this video, so if you're more interested in oracle decks or you're like me and you love both, you can go check that out. And I will, of course, be posting my decks that I used in my personal practice as well. So, I have a interesting and surprising assortment of decks this round that I want to share with you, and I have a couple of honorable mentions. Let's just dive in. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, which we're going to pretend is not ice cold. I'm going to get into it. So, first couple of honorable mentions. If I have a client who is new to tarot or is new to getting a reading and is kind of uncomfortable with the idea or nervous, this deck is one that I know is safe to pull out and I will often use. So this is the holographic tarot, and it's just an RWS deck, but it's hollow, and I love it. It's super plain. It's simple. I feel like the holographic gives it this more light, fun, modern kind of feel while still just being the traditional imagery. I like using this with new clients because if they're going to attempt to look up tarot for themselves, or if they've had exposure to tarot before, most often, of course, we have the iconic RWS imagery, and it's easily recognizable for them. I feel like there's also not a ton of confronting images in this per se, especially since I tend to prefer more of the dark and mysterious, macabre types of decks. Other decks in my collection can be quite assaulting to the eyes or worrisome if you're not quite sure, what tarot is. So I wanted to mention this as an honorable mention because it's not one that I use all the time, but it is an essential if I'm going to be reading for people who aren't familiar with tarot or aren't super comfortable with like readings in general. And I just love the shiny. Every time I show this deck, people are like, where'd you get it? So I'll leave it linked below in case you would like to check that out. It was pretty affordable on Amazon, and it's great quality. I've had it for years and it's held up really nice. So holographic tarot is an honorable mention. Another honorable mention that's kind of along those same lines is the Modern Witch Tarot. This is another one of those that I feel is easy for people to relate to. It is more modern, but again, it's not super confronting. It does bring the messages kind of into that everyday real world feel. It's a little mysterious. There's a couple of like sneaky things. But for the most part, it's not super scary. And I feel that there's like, this isn't cartoon-ish. That's not the right word for it, but I feel like it's storybook-esque enough that when something like, say, the Five of Swords comes up like this, people aren't as like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? Or like this, the devil, like he doesn't look very confronting, right? It looks kind of like something you'd see in a more family-friendly show. So I do find that this deck works well, again, for just all-around readings, but also for client readings, especially if you get the Ten of Swords. I love this Everything is Fine extra Ten of Swords card. I think it's really funny. This isn't a deck, again, that I use like in my personal readings a lot, but in my professional readings, this one will come out and does get an honorable mention for that reason. Moving into more decks you expect to see from me. I have one more honorable mention, and that is the Santa Muerte Tarot by Fabio Lustrani. This deck I only use when it asks to come out. The way that I work with decks with clients is, of course, they're readings, but I also do a lot of like program building or course building, and a lot of my experiences are led by tarot readings that I do, by the current energies. I take a very like channeled, let's work on your personal evolution approach in literally everything I do. And this deck came forward a lot this year. And I actually used this deck to structure our 78 Deep Tarot Voyage, which was a tarot studies course / challenge that I did in the first / second quarter of 2024. And this deck just made that structure for us. And I found that this deck also came forward during my crafting magic, there we go, experience with my students later this year. And I don't know, there's not a lot to say about this deck. I feel like this isn't a deck that I read. This is a deck that wants to be read for certain people, for certain circumstances. And like, I don't go, oh, I'm going to use the Santa Muerte Tarot today for X client. The Santa Muerte Tarot says, you're going to use me for X client. Not X as in like past, but X as in like XYZ. You know what I mean? So this is the Santa Muerte Tarot. An honorable mention, could be kind of on the list, but it wasn't like the most used. Like I didn't use it a ton, but it does have a very significant role within my professional work. And because I did use it for building such a large tarot experience in 2024, I felt like I couldn't leave her off the list. So that is the Santa Muerte Tarot by Fabio Lustrani. Moving along, I have other decks that kind of act in that similar way of like, I wouldn't expect to use this deck for clients, but when the deck wants to come out, it wants to come out. I have to shuffle this one. I don't know why. This is the Horror Tarot. And this deck loves working with clients. This is a fantastic, just like everyday reader, but this also loves to work with clients, especially in terms of like shadow work, embodiment, really looking at the more practical, like feeling aspect of it. Again, I find that similar to the Modern Witch Tarot, there's something about this deck that makes it more relatable and grounded into daily life or like digestible things. One card that really hit with a lot of my clients this year was the Moon with this werewolf, and really the idea of embracing that animalistic side of ourselves. And there's something about, you know, the theme of horror in general that does that very well, of like touching on those more darker things, the things that we're afraid of, the things that are perhaps taboo that other people would view us as monsters for. And there's something so beautiful about using this deck with clients who are in a liminal space, whether to structure what it is they're going to focus on or to just offer advice in general around that idea. because it makes it relatable. Like, look at this Ten of Swords. I love Ten of Swords cards, but it's like, you know, a skeleton that you would see while exploring like an abandoned cave or something in like a treasure hunting movie. There's something just so delicious and approachable about this deck. I adore Abigail Larson's artwork. I think she did a fantastic job with this. My only gripe with this deck, one, the titles are hard to read because they're in red foil, although that might have been changed since I purchased mine. I know there's been different issues and updates with this deck, but I really do love this deck. I also don't really like the Sun card. The Sun card is a clown, and I don't have anything against clowns. Like, I'm not scared of clowns, but I don't get clowns. And to have one of my favorite cards, the Sun card, be a clown is just like, I don't know. Although I guess it works, right? Like, if you're in that dark place, perhaps happiness feels like a joke. I don't know. I love this Star card with the Ouija board. So that is the Horror Tarot, one that really takes dark themes and makes them more accessible. And if you're someone who enjoys this artwork and wants something to dig into more of that things that go bump in the night shadow side of yourself, but in like a fun, lighthearted way, this is a fun deck to do that. I do not use the guidebook, would not recommend the guidebook, but if you know the RWS system, then this is a good option. Next, we have a deck that I used to never use for clients. I would only use for personal readings. And this year that changed. And this is the Haunted House Tarot by Sasha Graham. This is my most used deck of all time, has been since I acquired it in September of 2022, 2021. Most used deck that I still own. I should probably say that, because a lot of my original decks that I got like years and years and years ago, because I've been reading for a long time, those I have since passed on. But anyway, I digress. This deck I used a lot while teaching the course 78 Deep, which I talked about, that I put together with the Santa Muerte Tarot. And I also had a lot of clients who decided to purchase this deck for themselves this year and were kind of working with it on their own, which made me super happy as they were going through my courses and experiences, because I absolutely adore this deck. This deck is fantastic for understanding story within tarot, within yourself. You can use this for literally anything, but I really enjoy the fact that if you're doing personal work for yourself and you are mystically inclined, there is kind of this like witchy theme involved. There is a little bit of horror, but there's something about that haunted house that's like, you are the haunted house, and you discover that things may not be exactly as they appear. And you, as the person using the deck, for instance, this is the Fool, right? You see this Fool, and she goes through a journey. You see her in the cards, you see her like watching other characters that she like meets along the way. She finds herself in different situations. There's something so just like mysterious and relatable. You feel like the main character in your own story when you're using it. And it does have that, again, mystery, that lusty, crafty, like things aren't as they appear. I feel like I just keep repeating words. But yeah, I really, really enjoy this deck. Favorites of all time. I didn't use it as much for my personal practice. This used to be like only personal practice, and I would only use it to work with the energy of Lilith. But since I have stopped using it in that capacity, like on an everyday basis for myself, it has really come out this year and worked with my clients. And it's always exciting as someone who teaches tarot and does a lot of programs with tarot to see my students also getting excited about literally one of my favorite decks ever. So that is the Haunted House Tarot by Sasha Graham. And then, surprisingly, my most used tarot deck with clients this year is actually a deck that I had to reacquire. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment. But this year, at the beginning of this year, I had my original copy of the Darkwood Tarot, and I taught a couple of courses this year where I incorporated a physical mailer component, and I was mailing envelopes of tarot cards to my students for us to use together throughout the course or the experience that I was teaching. Super fun, by the way. And this deck, the Darkwood Tarot, is one of the decks that I included in those mailers because I felt like my work with the deck was finished. It wasn't one that I really reached for a lot. I adore the imagery, but I just wasn't reaching for it. So I was like, oh, I'll probably get it again eventually, but I wasn't super worried about it. And then I kept thinking about it, and it kept calling my name, and it was like, you need to acquire me again. So I put out a call. One of the lovely viewers had it, and I was able to trade some of the decks I wasn't using to obtain this copy, which the person who had it had edged it in red, which I think complements this deck very nicely, actually. And as soon as I got it back, it came out for client readings, and I don't know what it is about this deck. It just loves working with clients. It really enjoys just chatting. It loves to chat. And it's not really particularly fussed about whether you're chatting about what you're going to have for dinner, or you're looking at the deep meanings of life, or you're talking about shadow work, or you're taking it out in the summer sun. Like, this deck doesn't mind, at least in my experience, what it is that you want to investigate. It just wants to be used by you and loved by you. It has almost like fae energy to it. It doesn't have so much of that like trickster energy of the fae, but it does have that like on again, off again, playful, mysterious. I just want to be involved. I might not have a long attention span, but like what I show you is going to be cool, or at least I think it's really cool. That's like the personality of this deck. And this is another deck that I don't find myself using it a lot for myself. Kind of like the Santa Muerta Tarot, it finds me and demands that I work with it with clients, whether I want to or not. And I feel like that's very evident by the fact that I had to, my original copy ended up going around the world, pieced out to my students, and then this deck was like, you need to get me back because I have things to say to people. So that is the Darkwood Tarot. by Sasha Graham with art by Abigail Larson. And I'm just now realizing how funny this is because my most used tarot decks in my professional practice were either written or illustrated, either written by Sasha Graham or illustrated by Abigail Larson, which is kind of funny. But yes, so those are my most used tarot decks in my professional practice. I, of course, use a lot of other decks in my professional practice. I'm not locked into just these decks, but these are the decks that continue to show up in really big ways throughout the year for both one-on-one readings for people and for programs and experiences that I put together. So, yeah. I hope that you enjoyed this little peek into that part of my life. I'm looking forward to doing the one next year already, like for 2025, because I, without a doubt, am sure that these decks on this list will shift based on the clients that I end up working with in 2025. Because, you know, the professional decks really aren't about me. They're about the people that I'm working with and what they're going through and the way that their guides, their team, their archetypes are communicating with them and about what. So it's really fun for me to look at my decks in this way. I hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in the Oracle edition of this video, like I said, you can go check that out. That's already out. Or if you're more interested in my personal most used decks, that list will probably be longer. And I'll have that up either already or soon. So I'm sending you so much love. I can't wait to chat with you in the comments. And I will see you again in the next video. Take care, my loves. Bye.